Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy I could be part of this conversation. Um, these were all really interesting presentations. And what I was thinking I could do is to highlight a few topics and questions that emerged from the presentations and also from the Q&A part, and for all of us who study work, who study organizing, even if maybe like myself, I am not like I would say, a specialist on digital platforms, but I have been doing some research because I think it's a it's a sphere of life that has been growing. You know, the digital aspect of our lives have been growing a lot, and it also permeates work, organizing, and all the topics that we care, social justice. Um, so I will just mention some of the topics that I think are relevant for our discussion and for us, as researchers of work and people committed to social justice. The first topic or question that emerges, that I think we are all really aware of this, and in all the presentations there were aspects of these questions. It's about the consequence of digital technologies for the labor movement, for the working class. Um, are they only drivers of disorganization and atomization of work, or there are some aspects that we could find in which these technologies are empowering? I tend to think that in some ways, platforms are really tools for capital to increase control and exploitation of workers, obviously. But we should also think about in which ways digital platforms also allow for working class organization. For example, in particular sectors like domestic work. Lorena was presenting about Argentina. If it's a sector of the working class that comes from a history of disorganization and individualization, maybe platforms are a way to connect workers and to help unionization drives. I mean, there have been unions, at least in Argentina, for a long time, but maybe in this case, digital platforms can allow for more interconnection of workers. Or on the contrary, are platforms drivers of precarity, because we could think in the sector of delivery, for example, and I speak for the case of Argentina, which is a country with high unionization rates and really high standards of labor laws and collective bargaining agreements. And really now the delivery sector has been subject to dynamics of precarity and difficulties in unionization. So I think in this case, for example, we could think that platforms are a way of bringing precarity to labor markets. I don't know, in the case of Europe, I think it could be an interesting comparison. Karen mentioned about informality or the lack of at least large numbers of informality in Germany. So what would be the role of platforms in that context? So in summary, I just posed the question if can digital platforms be used for emancipatory strategies, or they are only ways of increasing exploitation, or they are both? I mean, I think we have a lot of cases here of different countries and experiences. A second aspect of the presentation that I would like to mention is about the relevance of legal framework and institutional frameworks of different countries. Because as we already know from decades of research, capital lands to particular countries with particular histories, labor movement histories, and also institutional frameworks. And I think in this case, I am not really familiar with the United Kingdom, but Germany and Argentina are countries that are relatively highly institutionalized, at least in comparison. Argentina in comparison to Chile, Uruguay, and other countries in the southern corner, and I believe in the case of Germany, in comparison to other European labor markets. So I would like to emphasize that when we study digital platforms and work dynamics, how they interact with existing unions and frameworks. And I recall one question I think Karen mentioned, if is formalization always good or not? I think it's a really relevant question. I mean, in Latin America, we really tend to say yes. I mean, I would never question, but I think it's really interesting to ask the question if maybe in some particular context that's not the case. A third topic, and I think it's related to the previous one, is that all the presentations can help build like a political economy of manual work, like of non-qualified. I know that digital platforms have been used for programmers and designers and all types of intellectual work, and I think this panel presents different cases of people doing manual work, like cleaning jobs or delivery, and how the platforms bring this type of very local jobs into a global dynamic, I would say. So I think it's interesting to think about the political economy of manual work, and how the digital platforms affect this. In two ways, I would say comparing countries or continents like Europe and Argentina, like Matthew and the team was doing, or even thinking about migration. And I think many of the studies mention that, particularly in the delivery sector, in Latin America, at least, it's a really high number of Venezuelan migrants. I mean, there is an interesting story there to be learned about why in this particular sector, the migrants from Venezuela have been so interested, and they were so successful in getting jobs in this sector. Because I mean, in Argentina, there are migrants from many different countries, and they, I mean, maybe it's just a coincidence in the historical timing, like platforms emerged in the middle of the 2010s in Latin America, and that's the period where Venezuelans were fleeing the country. So, two more topics that I think are interesting about the political economy of work also relates to the collective dynamics of organization. I already asked some of the questions that emerged from the presentation, and I think that it's something that really we need to focus. What do workers want? I mean, Lorena was presenting a really interesting case where domestic workers go to the app. So why would they go there if they prefer that to other types of working relations? And I think it's also related to what Angel was mentioning about some workers coming from a traumatic experience in Venezuela are really rejecting unions in Argentina and Chile. So that's also something to take into account. I mean, as a left person and sociologist, I always tend to think that unions are the best way to organize, but I think we have to listen to what the workers in this particular time and period are saying, and why there is so much difficulty to organize. If it's only because capital imposes new conditions, and that would be really bad for us, because if platforms are the future of work, or maybe not, which is another question that someone asked there, and I think it's really interesting. Or if there are also some collective dynamics that are organizing outside unions, and what can we learn from that? And finally, I think many of the presentations, and in particular the study of the collective action, made me think of the classic work of Beverly Silver, and how the waves of unrest are following the waves of investment. If there was a European wave of unrest in 2010 or around that period, and there was a Latin American wave in the pandemic, but now it's going down. Where is going to appear the next wave? Maybe we could see where capital is going, or maybe that's exhausted and capital is already global. So maybe some new dynamic emerges there. And that relates to also to the discussion about structural power and associational power that we have to think when we study this sector. For example, comparing delivery with domestic. I think from what I see and what I have heard from the presentations, there is more spontaneous organizations in the delivery sector, and maybe there is more relevance for traditional unions in the domestic sector. I don't know, just a question. And finally, my last comment, even if I don't know the disciplinary belonging of everyone, I think it was a very diverse panel, and that also speaks to the need to talk between disciplines. There were some law contributions, some sociology contributions, some geography contributions. So I think it's a topic that will bring all these perspectives together, and all these countries and disciplines. So I think that's a way we have as academics to respond to this new challenge, I would say. So thank you very much.